From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning and welcome to kind of a combination show. We've done this before of both the Cloudcast and the PodCTL Kubernetes podcast. So we've done that once before. We got a lot of really good feedback from people, and we are going to do that again today. So Tyler, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me over on this side too.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of real quick housekeeping things for folks. First off, if you are on the East Coast, if you're listening to this on the East Coast of the United States, anywhere from looks like Florida all the way up to Maryland or whatever, get out of the way of that hurricane. Take care of yourself. Listen to whatever advice they're giving you about taking care of yourself. This one looks really big, so we want everyone to be safe and sound and healthy, and watch out for the folks around you as well. So definitely watch out for Hurricane Florence. The other thing is, back on the PodCTL next week, we're going to do kind of a mailbag show. We've gotten a whole bunch of questions here recently from listeners, things through email and through Twitter and stuff. So we're going to kind of do a show that answers a bunch of your questions. So if you have any questions and you hear this, say before next Monday or Tuesday, shoot them to us. You can either send it to podctl at gmail.com or shoot it to the Twitter address as well, and we'll try and get those answered for you. So cool. So Tyler, when we look at sort of the most popular shows we've had both on Cloudcast and PodCTL the last 6, 8, 9 months, service meshes have come up. Istio and service meshes, and people are very interested in kind of all the different things it can do. So we thought today would be sort of fun and have a chance to dive into that space a little bit deeper today.
Yeah. I think, the two kind of halves of the topic go hand in hand too. So people, like service meshes, what they can potentially provide from a sort of scalability perspective, but then also on the security end too.
Yeah. So very excited today to have John Morello, who is CTO at Twistlock. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So excited to talk to you because Twistlock is, not only do we, partner together from a technology perspective with Red Hat and Twistlock, but more importantly, Twistlock is really well recognized in the industry for, your chops around containers, around Kubernetes, around security, around trying to bring AI to the security space and bring more intelligence around it. So excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to join you.
So let's get started real quick. Just for anybody who doesn't know either you or Twistlock, give us a little bit of your background personally and kind of the things that Twistlock is doing. Introduce us to the company as well.
Sure. So I'm the CTO. I was, I think, employee 2 when we started back in 2015. Before Twistlock, I was at Microsoft for about 14 years and did a whole bunch of different things, a lot of them in the security space, mostly around our crypto stack, like Active Directory certificate services and so forth, that ships in Windows. And then I was a CISO at a Fortune 500 chemical company. And when we started at Twistlock, the container space was very new. So we spent a lot of time frequently having a conversation about, like, what are containers? How are containers different than VMs? Why do you need security for containers and so forth? It's been really interesting to see over the past 3 years, not just the fact that we as a company have grown quite a bit, but that the market itself has really matured a lot as well. And that, it's no longer sort of a fringe thing where you got a few guys that are developers that think, this container thing is really cool because it makes their job easier. But you've got some really major customers and core kind of mission critical scenarios that people are addressing with containers. One of the neatest milestones that we've had recently with Twistlock, is, we can now say that we have more than a quarter of the Fortune 100 runs Twistlock. More than half the cabinet-level agencies in the U.S. government run Twistlock. And I think, not only is that something we're really proud of, but it also speaks to the maturity of the overall space with containers. That, you're seeing containers go from being a kind of a demo or a technical concept into something that people are really relying on in their businesses, that people are running mission-critical applications on and really look at as the next generation of infrastructure, following those waves of virtualization and IaaS before it.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, as Brian said earlier at the top of the show, that one of the most popular show topics we've had, and I know it's the same thing. Talk to a lot of people now is things like service mesh and projects like Istio, and I think that kind of matches perfectly. But like what you're seeing is, as containers started out as just a dev thing or very kind of proof of concepty, but as it's maturing and has a place in environments in production, this is sort of like the next level of the environment is how do we now get smarter and bring in some of these other technologies to take containers to the next level, and really seems to be service mesh is one of them. Can you just talk a little bit about the basics of why someone, say, who's running containers now wants to look at using a service mesh?
Yeah, I mean, I think the service mesh it follows much like the security pattern with containers, in that as people when people first start with them, your use cases are more simplistic, and you might say, well, then why do I need security, or why do I need, in this case, service mesh? As people start to use containers for running more and more sophisticated applications, you start to see some of the gaps that containers alone don't address, and that's not in any way designed to imply any kind of fault with Docker or open containers for that matter. Those following the kind of general Unix philosophy, they were designed to do a particular thing really well, and that particular thing was to isolate processes and file systems and so forth from each other, so that you could have a kind of a virtualization of the host OS. They weren't designed to be a way to manage across different hosts or to route traffic across different nodes. They were designed to do their particular job. And what a service mesh allows an organization to do is to really more effectively route traffic between multiple containers that span multiple nodes and possibly even multiple like physical sites and clouds. You may have a service mesh that addresses resources in AWS or multiple regions in AWS and on premises, or AWS and Google Cloud, for example, or whatever it may be. And that service mesh is designed to really typically provide a couple of major sets of functionality. One of them is just routing, to make sure that traffic from one microservice reaches another microservice properly and reliably, and to be able to do that without you having to worry about fragile ingress controllers and ingress mechanisms, and ensuring that you've got just this specific kind of routing topology that's all bespoke and configured in a very manual way. Service meshes are designed to really make that a much more dynamic, discoverable sort of thing, where you just kind of deploy your application and traffic kind of magically flows to the nodes that it's supposed to, without you having to worry about that at the IP layer. And then secondly, there's kind of a security aspect to service mesh as well. At least, Istio, which is kind of the predominant one right now, talks about security as being one of the fundamental deliverables there. And it is, but it's platform level security, in the sense that what Istio is trying to do is to provide an authentication mechanism, so that a particular microservice can authenticate and I guess authorize to some degree the access it has to other microservices in the environment, and to provide encryption of the traffic across those microservices, such that, again, if I have a deployment of an application that spans multiple clouds, I shouldn't have to worry about if one of those microservices sits on a cloud that's different from the one that's calling it, and that cloud is separated by the internet. I don't have to worry about that traffic going in the clear over the internet. And so one of the other things that Istio provides is security, in the sense of encapsulation and encryption of data in transit, which is an important capability that the service mesh provides as well. There's a lot of kind of, I guess, fringe things. Maybe you wouldn't even consider them fringe, more sort of like development and deployment things that service meshes provide as well, around like making it easier to do A/B testing and so forth. But to me, at least, the things that are most interesting and most relevant to most organizations is going to be the routing topology and the simplification of ingress routing. And then there's just kind of built-in security and identity primitives that you can use to provide those kind of basic levels of secure communications between the different microservices.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of people, because Istio is still fairly new. I mean, it just became GA 1.0 GA here just a few weeks ago. But people that have been following it are kind of keeping up with it from the proxy and routing capabilities. Where, as you're talking to companies, where does the security conversation start? Where does, obviously we start to get into proxying and we're kind of intervening in traffic flows, but where does the deeper conversation around security start, and where does Twistlock kind of play a role in that?
We actually we wrote a blog piece about this. I think it was published in the News Stack that we'll share with you guys in case you want to include it in the links on this podcast. But basically, the place where we see Istio is providing really this great value to customers is making some of the things that historically have been difficult from a security standpoint easier. And primarily amongst them is providing an identity framework for the application components rather than like user accounts. Historically people have tried to shoehorn application authentication in with some kind of users. Like my app runs as user XYZ, and so then you try to reuse existing operating system and application level primitives that understood user accounts to try to represent an application identity. And that could work sometimes, but generally it wasn't a really great fit for that, and typically required a lot more manual effort to do so. So Istio provides this notion of really providing a set of capabilities about like what an application is and through service accounts, and be able to really utilize that as a way to authenticate components with each other. So you could say that like my back-end component should only receive traffic from this particular front-end component, for example. The other thing that Istio provides that historically has been difficult that Istio makes a lot easier is around providing just end-to-end TLS automatically. Historically, if you wanted to provide TLS within your environment, it meant that you were going to have to go out there and manage the issuance and life cycle of potentially many different certificates and key pairs around the environment. And while there's tools and practices that exist, none of them are particularly like friendly and simple to use. And I think one of the things that Istio provides that's of most value to people is the fact that it just kind of is there by default. I don't have to go to any kind of real work to ensure that traffic flows between the different components of my application are always going to be encrypted. It's just kind of a core promise that's there. And the way that we look at security from a Twistlock standpoint, we're really, as a company, we're really focused on not just trying to provide like basic platform capabilities, but really trying to provide active threat defense. And that comes from a lot of different things that we do, from detecting and preventing vulnerabilities throughout the life cycle of your application, to the active runtime defense that we use, where we actually model what's normal and then automatically prevent anomalies, like in terms of process activity or file paths or network IO and so forth. And none of that really changes with Istio, but what Istio allows us to do is to provide basically be able to learn about the environment more accurately, with a higher degree of fidelity than we could without it, and to be able to encourage our customers, as we almost always do, to take advantage of what the platform provides natively versus us trying to somehow compete with it. In other words, we don't look at like it ever being a question of like, should I use Istio or should I use Twistlock? It's really about providing multiple layers of defense and depth. Istio provides great things, again, for providing that awareness of services and how they interact with each other. And it provides a great like baseline of ensuring that traffic is encrypted between the endpoints. What it doesn't help you with, though, is if your front end microservice has some critical vulnerability in it and somebody exploits it, they're running code within that microservice. Well, Istio is still going to route that within your environment as it normally would. It's still going to encrypt the traffic, but it's going to be encrypting potentially attack traffic from there to the back end. And that's the kind of thing that we at Twistlock help with, is identifying and preventing those threats by building on the underlying platforms that Istio and Kubernetes and even Docker, for that matter, help provide.
Yeah. I think that's key when we talk to customers. They're looking to keep things as simple as possible while getting these type of advanced capabilities, and kind of I think that's obviously things like Istio, where the microservices service mesh type of capabilities is more with the platform versus sort of like the Netflix model of building it yourself. And one of the things with that is, well, obviously you could always do multiple containers per pod and from a Kubernetes perspective, but I would say it's relatively uncommon. But with service mesh, it is common, because you're going to basically, your one container is the application, the other one is the service mesh proxy. When you start looking from a security perspective, do you need like another container agent pod, or is it leveraging the same sort of through the integrated with the service mesh proxy?
Well, I mean, our approach with it is not just with Istio, but regardless of whether you're using a service mesh or just Kubernetes or even just a standalone host where you're running containers, we never add any additional code or additional processes to the actual containers that you're running. I know some of our competitors take that approach. We think that's just fundamentally something that doesn't scale well, and from an operational and management standpoint, really detracts from the kind of the best practices for how to run containers. So with Twistlock, on each node, each compute node, each OS instance, you're going to run on top of that OS instance a single Twistlock, what we call a Defender container, and that Defender container protects all the other containers and pods that run on that host, but it doesn't inject anything into them. And so what we basically are doing is acting as kind of a sideband monitor. We don't run as dash privilege from a Docker concept or Docker standpoint. We basically take a very selective degree of additional permissions on the host that allow us to act as part of that host OS, but without having raw device access. We're still a containerized entity ourselves. And most importantly, without having to actually inject ourselves into the actual running namespaces that the other containers that are on that host have. Because I think if you do that, you end up with a situation where you're kind of recreating that ugly scenario that you saw with virtual machines, where if you've got a host where you've got 10 VMs running and each of them has your antivirus software in it, you're spending half the CPU cycles on that host just running antivirus software. And I think it can be the same kind of thing if you try to inject software into every one of the pods that's running. You end up running so many copies of the security software, you really lower the scalability that you're trying to achieve with the containers.
Yeah, one of the things I've been curious about, and I haven't personally had a chance to dive deep in either with with some of the developer side folks. I know we have some people that look at that, but or the like CISO security folks. How have the conversations gone so far that you've had with folks as they're kind of adapting to this service mesh model, right? They were very used to, like you mentioned, either having dedicated agents that they would use for something, or the developers were saying, well, I've got to build this security into my application and all that code. Like, how are you seeing the education around this transition of like, you don't have to worry about that as much anymore. It's going to be built into this sort of platform layer, mesh layer thing. How have you had any conversations yet just that are, people get it or they're struggling with it, or what have you seen so far?
I would say right now it's still so early for most people that, a lot of customers are right now just still like doing their first deployments of containers and Kubernetes and OpenShift and stuff. And so for them to like get to the point where they realize that there are still some unmet needs that something like Istio could help with, I wouldn't be not be lying to you if I told you that like the mass market, I think, is really at that point yet. I think where we're at today with service mesh is kind of where we were with orchestrators like maybe 2.5 years ago, in the sense that like people that are already advanced in the current state of the art realize that there is an unmet need and that there are projects that are being developed to help meet that need. There's a lot of talk about it, but I think that the number of people who really understand the space and what's required and the pros and cons of different options is still relatively small. I think that'll certainly change over the next couple of years as people, again, have more and more sophisticated applications that they run in containers. But right now, the kind of conversation that I have about service mesh most regularly with people is customers wanting to understand, like, well, what is it? Why do I need this service mesh thing if I already have an orchestrator? So that's the first conversation. And then secondly, a lot of times they may have heard of Istio and they hear about security as being one of the capabilities that Istio provides. And so we have that same conversation that you and I just had a few moments ago in this podcast about there's a difference between like platform level security, which is good and wholesome and everybody should take advantage of, which is designed to provide like the kind of the basic best practices that are there, and the kind of like active threat protection and detection and response type stuff that we're doing. And so it's not, again, a question of either or, but of having those multiple layers of defense and depth. But I guess the summary to answer your question is it's still very early. Most people don't really, most people being like Fortune 500 type decision makers don't really understand the need for a service mesh yet. And if they do, they're still very early in just understanding what their options are and what do they want out of it and what the requirements would be.
Yeah. So, for like early adopters and so forth, the service mesh, again, any distributed system, people talk about, it's great for quickness of deployment, you're building smaller applications, but then you're splitting stuff up. You're having to deal with networks in between and so forth. What are you seeing as some of the tools, whether they're visualization tools or others that are useful for folks as they're building microservices, potentially using service meshes to make this less unruly and more kind of visible and manageable and so forth?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question, because I feel personally like that's one of the areas that is in need of the most development, the most improvement. Today, there's some very rudimentary kind of raw, almost proof of concept like projects around Visio visualization, of Istio integration, visualization. But there's not something that's like a very easily understandable, like Visio-like depiction of what that service mesh looks like. And that blog that I was referring to earlier that we wrote on the news stack, that's actually the key product capability that we're adding to Twistlock in our next release for Istio integration, is adding that Istio awareness to the view that we have that we call Radar. So Radar is something we've had for a long time in the product that basically learns all the connectivity between all the different microservices. Pre-Istio, there was just Kubernetes components talking to each other, Docker Swarm for that matter, and being able to model all that and to show like how they communicated the ports and protocols and directions of traffic, and then providing a bunch of data overlays like the vulnerability state of the images in the pods or the compliance state and so forth. And what we're doing with Istio is we're able to learn even more and to learn more about the specific protocols. So the way that we've done it historically has been basically a layer 3 inspection. So we could tell you like this thing talks to that thing over a particular port, but we didn't really have protocol awareness like Istio gives us some abilities to have. We also can discover via the Istio API information about the services and the service accounts that are used, and be able to show that as an additional layer of data in that Radar view. And so our goal within Twistlock is to leverage those capabilities that the Istio API provides to be able to discover and learn and enrich the data that we're already showing you about that, how those microservices communicate with each other, such that you get closer and closer to basically having a live network map. That every time you're doing a deployment, we're learning about how everything communicates with each other. When you have Istio present, we're able to learn about it in a more definitive manner, to be able to show that to you on the Radar view, and then again to be able to enforce those connectivity patterns by being able to create policies that are then ingested and enforced via Istio.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, I think we're going to kind of wrap it up there. I think, like I said, we'll get the link to the blog in the show notes, plus some other good things around ways people can kind of get their hands on service mesh and so forth. Tyler, any last things to kind of wrap up on the service mesh discussion?
I think it was pretty, it's a pretty good way to start thinking about those two together. Early stages, like John said, that people aren't really. It's really early adoption phase with service mesh. So I think this is actually a good time to be thinking about security, where a lot of times it ends up being an afterthought at the end. So, kind of thinking about those two together, I think it's good timing. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's always good to get ahead of this stuff. The last thing we want to do is keep continuing the habit we have of talking about security and adding security at the very end. Hey, John, real quick before we go, let folks know where they can hit you up and find you, out and about if they want to ask you questions. But also, real quick, just give us a little bit of background. I know you do some very cool work, sort of volunteer work to keep the coast down in Louisiana where you live safe and clean and so forth. Just give us 2 seconds on what you do in that space. Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the board of directors for the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, which is the state's largest and oldest nonprofit advocacy group for environmental stewardship of the coast, but primarily around the problem that we have in Louisiana with coastal land loss, which is largely caused by man-made factors like the damming or the leveeing of the Mississippi River, which prevents sediment from flowing into marshes, which and then over time is eroded through just natural wave action and relative sea level rise through climate change. And so, we're doing a lot of work with CRCL to try to strengthen that and preserve the natural and even the kind of the cultural impact of Louisiana's coast. So thanks for having the opportunity to talk about that. If you're interested in that, you can go to crcl.org for more information on that. And you can find me. My Twitter handle is MorelloNet. So you can find me at MorelloNet. And you can follow us on Twistlock at TwistlocKteam. Very cool. And we'll get all that in the show notes for folks. And John, with that, I want to wrap it up. Thank you so much for the time today to talk to both the Cloudcast and PodCTL listeners about a topic they're very interested in, service mesh and Istio. And folks, if you're looking in that space, definitely dig into the security aspects of it as well. Don't get caught behind the 8 ball trying to add it at the last minute. So with that, Tyler, we're going to wrap it up. Folks, as always, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.